This week's parsha is Parshas Lech. God tells Abraham, Lech lecha me'aretzecha, go out from your land, u'mimiladetecha, from your birthplace, u'mibeis avicha, and from the house of your fathers, el ha'aretz asher arecha, to the land which I will show you. There is a saying, medaf leben mit der Zeit. We have to live with the times, and this means that a Jew should live with the parshat hashavua, with the weekly parsha. And consequently, every day this week, each one of us needs to live with that imperative of lech lecha, of constantly being on the go, of rising and gaining new horizons in our service of God. And yet we find a very perplexing thing in the parsha. It says that as soon as Abraham arrived in the promised land, there was a famine. So much so, out of necessity, Abraham and Sarah had to descend to Egypt. Abraham was worried that Pharaoh may abduct her, and so he claimed that she was his sister. In fact, she was praised as a beautiful woman to Pharaoh and taken into Pharaoh's house. And it was only a miracle that saved her from being abused. One may ask a question. If God had told Abraham that he should go out, he should journey forth, he should embark upon this primary odyssey that would take him to new heights, and there he would become great, his name would be publicized in the world, then how come, as soon as he gets there, he is forced to leave the land and to go down to Egypt? If he was on the ascent, then why the immediate descent? True, it could be considered as a test and one of his trials and tribulations, but what is the lesson for us? You see, each one of us has to take a lesson and live with the parsha. What can we learn from the ascents and the descents of life? It says, Ma'aseh avos seman lebanim. The actions of the forefathers is an indication to the children. Whatever happened to the patriarchs happened to their children. Just like Abraham and Sarah descended into Egypt, so too did their children. But what happened when Abraham left in Egypt? It says that he left b'mikna, b'kesef, u'b'zohov. He was heavily laden with cattle, with silver, and with gold. And similarly, his children, when they left Egypt after the Egyptian bondage and exile, by the redemption they left laden with the delicacies and bounty of Egypt. In fact, although when he got to the promised land, there was a reason for a descent, but that descent became part of a further ascent. In fact, when he came back to the land of Israel, he was even greater and more successful and richer than was when he originally got there. And this tells us a life lesson. Often we can be full of enthusiasm, we can start off, and we're ready to rise to the challenge. And then we're hit by a wave. We start on a descent. We spiral, and things go wrong. But we need to know that that too is part of the divine plan. We need to know that when we're going down, that also is part of the ascent. Let me give you an example. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbis saw a necessity to recall the oral tradition. Otherwise it was going to be forgotten. It was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, who first wrote down the Mishnah. And after the passing of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, there was collated and collected a huge amount of information surrounding the Mishnah called the Talmud. 2 Talmuds were written. One Talmud was written in Jerusalem called the Jerusalem Talmud, edited by Rabbi Yochanan, and then a second Talmud edited by Ravina and Ravashi was made and written in Babylon. There's a major difference between the two. The Jerusalem Talmud is much more succinct, it's shorter, it comes to the point. The Babylonian Talmud is more meandering in nature, much more questions and answers, it probes deeper, and yet when we have a difference of opinion between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, we always rule according to the Babylonian Talmud. For in fact, out of the darkness comes the light. Out of the questions and answers and the probing and the difficulty comes the resolution. This concept of galut, of exile, which brings to an even greater redemption, began with Avraham Avinu, with Abraham, our patriarch, and is playing itself out in the course of Jewish history today. We are at the end of a long and arduous exile, and we are near the beginning of a future redemption. Through the righteous Mashiach Tzidkenu, may Mashiach come speedily in our days. We need to recognize that the descent is for the purpose of an ascent. And although we look around in the world around us, and we find a difficult world, and we're challenged continually, we need to know that specifically at this moment, every mitzvah, every limud haTorah, every shiur, every learning, every mitzvah that we can do will elevate the world and will bring us to the final redemption, to that great light of the third temple, which will be even greater than the previous temples. The descent is for the purpose of an ascent, an even greater ascent. So let us get on that journey of Lech lecha, of going higher and higher, and even though we may be challenged by an initial descent, to view it for the purpose of an ascent. Good Shabbos.